What you guys, got another PC build video here for you. If you're looking for a gaming PC but you don't have a lot of money, then buying a pre-built system is probably one of the best ways of going about it. This system does have a Ryzen 5 4650G, and I wanted to make some changes to it, so I'm going to change the case so the motherboard fits better in that case, and I can use the other case for another build at a later date. This is a micro ATX case, which means the motherboard should go all the way down to the bottom, which won't show all those ugly cables. Also, I am changing the power supply for a better power supply, and we're making some changes to the RAM as well, because this only comes with one 16GB stick of RAM, and even if I bought the 8GB stick, it would still only have one stick, which means we're not running on dual channel. So I wanted to run dual channel on this system. So I thought I'd take it all apart and make some changes. So you can see this is the motherboard here, Asus Prime A520M-K. That is the motherboard in here. We're going to be replacing the cooler here, so I'm going to remove the cooler, and I want to also put some better compound on here just to make sure that it's running nice and cool. So I'm going to take all this apart and rebuild it and put some RGB into it. Now this motherboard doesn't support any RGB, so we'll have to use a hub and stuff like that to make RGB work on here. So this is the stock cooler, no copper on the bottom here. It's an okay cooler, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that the person wanted a bit of RGB, so I thought I will try and add some RGB here. The problem is the motherboard don't support that, so we will need to use a hub and things like that to get the RGB working. So I'm going to clean off the CPU here, and this is a Ryzen 5 4650, which means it is 6 cores and 12 threads, which is a pretty good APU. You can't buy these on the market for retail. They're only sold as OEM systems, and that's why I had to buy that pre-built system so I could get my hands on this APU here. So we're going to line it up here with a little triangle and put it back into its little socket here. And once I've got this in, I'll pull the retention lever down and get that nice and tight in there. And we can then add some thermal compound and put on the cooler that we're going to use for this build. So this is the cooler that come with the build, and I'm going to replace this with a pretty much an RGB cooler. Now this is a little bit too big for what I needed, but this is the only one I had to hand, and I'm going to be using it in this build. You won't be able to put a GPU in here because the board is very small and the cooler is going to be too big, but you can always remove that cooler and put a smaller one on once he gets the money for a GPU or when the GPUs become available. So I just need to get the back plate sorted here for AMD socket, and I'm just pushing a little plastic clip on with the screw in here so I can put it on the bottom of the motherboard. Once I've got this on there, I'll be able to put on the mounting screws so we can then start to mount the CPU cooler. So what I'm going to do here is push this down onto the bench here so I've got it nice and flat. And what we need to do here is put in the bolts here. They've got a little screw on them, so I'm just going to screw these in to the motherboard. And once I've got these down, I will need to put a little bracket onto the CPU cooler itself. So this will then actually screw onto these actual mounts here. So let me go ahead and tighten these up finger tight first. I can tighten them down with the little spanner that comes in the kit. Now this bracket needs to go on a certain way for Intel and for AMD chips, so make sure you read the manual if you're using this cooler. Now this cooler will be ideal for an ATX motherboard. Micro ATX is a little bit small and it will take up quite a lot of surface on the board, which means you might not get access to the RAM that easy, and also you won't be able to get access to the GPU slot, which when you want to put a GPU in there, it might not fit. So bear that in mind if you're using a cooler like this. We are not using a GPU, so it doesn't really matter as of yet, but when he comes to putting a GPU in there, he will need to replace either the board or the actual cooler itself. So let's go ahead and get some compound on here. I'm using MX4. This is pretty good compound. Just going to squirt a bit of this onto the CPU and then we can spread it out. So let me just go and put a bit of this on. Now you can either leave this as is like this and just put the cooler down on top, or you can spread it out with the little spreader it comes with. So I'm just going to spread this out. I tend to spread it out on Ryzen processors and leave it as a little blob on the Intel versions. So now I've got this all spread out, what I'm going to do is offer up the cooler itself, put it onto the mounting screws, and then I can put the little bolts here to screw it right the way down. So it does come with a little spanner in the kit to tighten this up. But first I'm going to tighten these up finger tight, and then I'll get the little spanner to tighten these down on each corner to make sure it's nice and tight. Just like so, as you can see here. Now you can see the width of this cooler. It's quite a wide cooler, so make sure it's going to be okay for your build if you're looking to buy something like this. It's a little bit like a UFO. Now this does actually have a cable which will go straight to the motherboard, and it also has another way of using it, so you don't have to have onboard RGB on your board, so you can actually use the little power adapter. So here we have some RAM. I'm going for an XPG GAMMIX D10. This was £60 for 16 gigs, which is a pretty good deal. Now there's the GPU slot here. It's going to be a tight squeeze to get a graphics card in there. So if you are using a graphics card, then make sure that you can get the actual graphics card in the slot. So what we're going to do is use this RAM here. You can see this is the Team Group 16 gigabyte stick it come with, but now we're using this dual channel stuff, which should be much more beneficial for this particular processor. So let's go ahead and get this into the case. So I'm going to put the IO shield in first, and basically all I need to do here is make sure this is in the right orientation, move any sort of cables out the way. I've also got the mounting screws already in the case in the right positions, so I just need to put in the IO shield. This just pops in, very simple and easy to do. Now probably this is the only way you're going to be able to get a gaming system today, because GPUs are just completely impossible to find right now. So this was an option that we had to go with for this build. So we've got the motherboard standoffs already in the correct position by default when we bought the case, so that's good. It just means I can offer up the motherboard now into the case, and it should go straight into the IO shield and be no problem there. So let's go ahead and get that in. I'm just going to hold the cooler here and slot this into position. And then we can screw the motherboard down with the mounting screws into the standoffs there. Pretty straightforward stuff. So just make sure you've got all your cables out the way here. You don't want to be getting them trapped underneath the motherboard, or you don't want any sort of standoffs in the wrong position here touching the board, which could short the board out. So you've got to be careful. Make sure all the standoffs are in the right place. Once you're happy with that, you can then go ahead and start to screw down the motherboard. And the screws come in the pack when you buy your case. So whatever case you buy, it will come with a little bundle of screws. So let's go ahead and screw down the motherboard. Now I'm not going to show you every single screw here, and this is not really how to build a computer video. It's just to show you basically what I did with the pre-built system that I bought the other day, and getting it ready for the person who wants it. So let's go ahead and get the rest of these screws in. So once all the screws are in, we can then go ahead and move on to the next job, which is putting the fans in. So I'm going to put some RGB fans in here, 2 at the top and 1 at the back, and that will add a bit of RGB bling to the build. Now if you don't like RGB, you can go ahead and just get normal standard fans, but it does come with its own remote control and its own hub here, and this will allow us to get RGB onto this system here without having RGB headers on the motherboard. Now you don't really need this many fans in a build. You can actually get away with just 1 at the front and 1 at the back. You don't really need that many fans, but the person wanted a bit of RGB in here, so we're going to add some RGB fans in. Also, it just saves the job of upgrading to those a little bit later on, so we'll do it all now, and basically all we need to do is put in the GPU when he gets one. So let's go ahead and offer the fan up and get it screwed in. Just 4 mounting screws that need to be screwed for the actual fans here. And I've done all of the back, and I'll also do the top fans as well. Now this is a great way to get RGB into a budget build to make it look a bit more fancy if you're into RGB, that is. So you don't really need an RGB header on the motherboard, but it is nice to have one of those so you can get a little bit more easier to choose what color scheme you want, and also to synchronize them all with the other fans and other cooler and stuff like that you've got RGB on. So let's go ahead and finish this off here. So these are all tightened up, and we can now put the magnet filter back on top. There we go. So that's now done. We're going to be putting a power supply in. Like I said, we've gone for a pretty decent power supply here. 10-year warranty on this. This is another XPG power supply, 650 watt, fully modular. A bit overkill for this particular build, but as I said, when he upgrades and puts a GPU in here, he won't need to worry about the power supply because we've already put a decent power supply in there ready. So it just means that he's going to have a really good power supply running his computer. And you can see here, it's much better than the ketchup and mustard cables they used before. These have all been blacked out, and it's got nice sleeving around the cables. Again, fully modular means that you can plug in what cables you need and then keep the rest back, so you don't actually overcrowd the case with loads of unnecessary cables that you're not using. The specs of this is pretty impressive. It's a 650 watt, 54 amps, and also on the 12-volt rail, which means you're getting quite a decent power supply here. So I'm just going to go ahead and put these cables in that I'm going to be using in this build, which will be the CPU, 24-pin, and also some SATA cables and stuff like that. So we go ahead and plug all these in. They're in, so I just need to get the power supply in. I'm going to have the fan facing down because we've got a filter on the bottom. And once I've got this in, I just need to screw this in with 4 screws. So pretty straightforward and easy to do. Now the power supply is one of the items that people tend to cut corners on. And let me tell you, if I had £1 for every time I've seen power supplies let go and take all the hardware with it, I'd be a millionaire. It really is bad to use cheap quality power supplies. So these pre-built systems that you buy online, most of the time they're coming with cheap branded power supplies. So just rip them out and replace them with something decent, something like what you see in this video. So I'm just poking all the cables through here, the 24-pin, the CPU, the USB 3.0 cable, and so on. And I'll get these all plugged in to the board. And you can see here the board looks a lot better in this case because it goes all the way down to the bottom. So once we get all this put together, it should look a lot more nicer and more pleasing to the eye. Now, if that's not a problem for you and you want to use a micro ATX motherboard in a larger case, then by all means do so. But it will never look nothing with the cables like that because they'll be dangling down and it looks a little bit unsightly. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all the cables plugged in here, the USB cables and also the front panel cables and stuff like that, audio cables. Get these all plugged in, CPU header and the 24-pin. All those will be plugged into the board, and then we can go ahead and move on to the next bit, which will be a bit of cable management and just generally tidy up the build itself. Now, with the motherboard coming all the way down to the bottom of the case here, it means you only see a small amount of cable, and it just looks a little bit tidier, in my personal opinion, and makes it look a little bit more fuller inside that case, if that's the right word to use, where your motherboard is not looking so lost in a massive case. And it will make it much more sellable if you're building PCs like this with the right cases, with the right motherboards, because that makes people look at it in a different light compared to having a little tiny board in a massive case. So let's go ahead and get the fan hub here. Now this is another great option if you don't have RGB headers on the motherboard, and you can use something like this to get some RGB into that build, and it's a great way of making a PC look pretty nice. So you can see here the cable management's all done at the back, and the PC build is now complete, and it looks pretty nice in my personal opinion. It looks much more in perspective. All the motherboard fits lovely in there. We've got a much better case that fits better with that motherboard. The power supply has been changed. Everything is ready to go. We've got some RGB in there, and I think it turned out pretty well. It definitely looks a little bit better than what it was when we got it, and I think that's what our main goal was. And again, you can use whatever parts you've got, but I had some parts lying around and I wanted to use them to keep the cost down. But again, I think Andy will agree, it does look pretty nice, and he can change that color scheme to whatever color scheme he likes, but he did tell me he liked blue, so I've just got it on a blue sort of color. The cable management turned out a lot better compared to what it was before. We've replaced some of the cheaper components that come with this pre-built system and made it into a much more better system with better branded parts that will last a lot longer and also protect the life of the PC. When he gets a chance to be able to get a GPU, he can then put one straight into that system. Now, give one game a quick go here. I haven't had much chance to tweak the system yet, but you can see here, without tweaking the system, we're getting 39 frames per second, which isn't too bad for an onboard graphics. And again, this will be able to play a lot of other games as well at lower frame rates, but it's a 1080p monitor we're playing on here, and we're getting pretty good frame rates here, as you can see. Not too bad for onboard graphics. Now, I think this PC is a nice bridge gap until he gets a chance to get his hands on a proper GPU where he can play at higher frame rates, but we have to wait until the GPU prices come down, until they become more available and in stock. At the moment, you just can't get your hands on one, and this is the only option that we had available. So all in all, not a bad system. I will do some more testing, and I will do some more benchmarks with some other games. So let me know in the comment section below what games you want to see me test with this little system, and what benchmarks you want to see, and I'll do my best to make those videos for you. So as you can see, at these sort of frame rates, you're probably looking at console level frames per second. So I'm pretty sure with a few bits of tweaks, we might be able to push a bit more frames per second out of this APU. So yeah, not too bad for the money. Anyway, I think that's going to be about it for this video. So I hope Andy enjoys his new PC. I shall get this posted off as soon as I can, and he should have it by the weekend. My name has been Brian from brotechcomputers.co.uk. Just want to say a big shout out to all my YouTube members who have joined my YouTube members group. I really do appreciate the support, and I shall see you again for another video real soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye for now.